Turning now to endorsements, huge story here in Washington. The Washington Post, the local hometown paper, has decided not to endorse in this year's presidential election. Let's put this up there on the screen. This decision was announced by the Post internally some, 9 days before the election. The decision was made by this new editor. His name is Will Lewis, a former Rupert Murdoch employee from the UK, calling back to the history of the Washington Post pre-1960, and they're not making presidential endorsements. Now, there has been quite a lot of discussion about this, certainly because you may have noticed, but at the very top of the Washington Post, there's a little line underneath it. It says, "Democracy dies in the darkness." And I seem to recall, millions of dollars and lots of people here in DC signing up for the Washington Post for Democracy Dies in the Darkness, and lots of resistance liberalism and columnists there who signed up for that vision under Jeff Bezos. And then Bezos himself deciding 9 days before the election, like, yeah, you know what? We're not gonna endorse here. So there's quite a lot to say about it. Yeah. I think it really just comes down to the capriciousness of billionaire-owned media. Yeah. And, a lot of people, I don't know, tell me if you agree with me. There's been a big thing online about people who are canceling the Washington Post, and journalists and others, their subscriptions, are like, please don't cancel the Washington Post. It hurts journalists. And I'm gonna go, you know what? Let me defend these folks. These people signed up for freaking Democracy Dies in the Darkness. Yeah. They're resistance libs. These are the people who made millions selling an annotated copy of the Mueller report, okay? Some people, Pepperidge Farm remembers. So when those same people don't see a Kamala endorsement, what do you think is gonna happen? You took their money gladly.
I agree
when
with
it
you.
was anti-Trump.
I agree with you.
Sorry, you
agree
can't have it both ways.
Also, it's owned by a billionaire.
Yeah, that's right.
If he wants to kick in some more money, it will be nothing.
He lost $100 million last year on the Post. He's not going to chap his ass to lose 4,000 subscribers. Okay?
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah. So, if he wants to fill in that gap, then that's on him. That's not on, the people who are disgusted with this decision. And I don't care how you feel about Kamala Harris or Donald Trump. You should be disgusted with this decision because it's pretty clear. The Washington Post reported that the decision did come directly from Jeff Bezos, and we all know why. He's a big government contractor. Blue Origin has massive contracts with the federal government, and Trump did cancel some of his contracts last time around too. So he's looking at this, and he's putting his own class capitalist interests ahead of the way of the the journalistic integrity of the Post. That's what's going on here. And by the way, we can put E2 up on the screen. Friday's announcement, they write at The Guardian, didn't mention Amazon and didn't mention Blue Origin, but within hours, high-ranking officials of Blue Origin met with Trump after a campaign speech in Austin, Texas. As the Republican nominee seeks a second presidency, Trump met with Blue Origin CEO and Vice President of Government Relations, that means lobbying, according to the AP. Meanwhile, CNN reported the Amazon CEO, Andy Jassy, had also recently reached out to speak with the former president by phone. Those reported overtures were eviscerated by Washington Post editor-at-large and longtime columnist Robert Kagan, which TLDR, he calls it a clear quid pro quo. And I think that's fairly obvious, right? Bezos doesn't want to have his government contracts canceled again. He doesn't want to be crosswise with Trump. He wants to make nice with him because he thinks Trump may well be back in the White House. And he knows there'll be no punishment from the Kamala Harris people if they win. They're not going to, go out for quote unquote retribution. So yeah, that's what's going on. And again, like I said, this is not to try to make a partisan point. This is to say you should be very, very leery of billionaire influence in politics, billionaire influence in media, billionaire ownership. And I will also say, when Bernie Sanders made this point back in 2020 about how the Bezos Washington Post maybe wasn't too friendly towards him because of his class politics, he was smeared as a conspiracy theorist by the same people who now, you owe Bernie Sanders an apology because obviously he was right.
I did so many monologues. Actually, some of my most viral monologues initially over at Rising were specifically about this, about billionaire ownership of the Washington Post.
Yeah, that's right.
I remember when Bloomberg was in the race?
And
then Bloomberg News was like, we're still objective. I go, yeah, you're definitely still objective. Whenever the guy of your namesake is in the goddamn race.
That's right.
Sure.
That's right.
And by the way, the guy justifying that, Micklethwaite, is the same British moron who was on stage with Trump talking about tariffs, just so people know, for who exactly are like the most corrupt people in this country. And that's the point. The point, though, and the irony, is when democracy dies in the darkness, these people didn't give a damn about billionaire ownership because it was fine for them. And yet now it's, oh my God, you know, he's like playing with our lives and giving up on our values. And look, I have some sympathy because Jennifer Rubin, right? I mean, these brain dead resistance people, to be fair, they were courted on this basis. They were employed on the very like real idea. Even Robert Kagan, right? Okay, so for people who don't know who Robert Kagan is, literally one of the chief voices for war in Iraq, neoconservative, unreconstructed, married to Victoria Nuland, who is one of the most psychotic former members of the State Department, of NATO expansion, etc. I have nothing nice to say about these people, but they were hired on the basis of being anti-Trump for these quote-unquote like principal reasons. So even though I disagree with them, it's not like they don't have a coherent worldview. And so for Bezos to just change the rules of the game, which he can, is deeply disingenuous to his readers and to his employees. And that's the problem, is that when it's capricious and it's totally up to him, it's just a ludicrous position that puts, you know, it just tells us what the whole game is about.
Yeah.
And I want everybody to know that. And also why nobody, billionaire or whatever, owns a slice of this company. And the only people who control it are the vast majority of our premium subscribers.
It is also, I mean, it is also like capitulation in advance because they do know that Trump will, like, you know, will look to punish his political enemies because he's done it in the past. And there's more reporting from the Washington Post this morning. I'm just reading, Jeff Stein tweeted this out. Some billionaires who Trump targeted are now hedging their bets as the former president vows retribution against enemies if elected. Bezos blocks Wapo endorsement. Zuckerberg is promising neutrality. Warren Buffett is staying out. The Google chief reportedly called Trump to praise his McDonald's stop. CEOs rushing to back channel to Team Trump. Quote, Trump has had no issue calling out political enemies by name, threatening to use the force of government for retribution. Apparently that is intimidating. A lot of wealthy targets is a very scary sign that government intimidation works, is the take of one individual. So, you know, I do think this is part of a pattern of people who fear that Trump is going to end up back in the White House and don't want to be on his bad side because they want their companies to continue to flourish. They don't want to be made an example of by Trump, even by just turning them into a partisan name, et cetera. So that's part of what you see going on. Lumped into this conversation potentially unfairly was the LA Times, which also decided not to endorse in this race. And I think you could similarly make a point about, like, you know, it's the billionaire owner of the LA Times who is also making the decisions for the newsroom about not endorsing, but seems to have a more principled reason for doing so. We can put this up on the screen with regards to LA Times. So their billionaire owner says that they are protesting Kamala's support of Israel's war in Gaza. This is according to his daughter, a 31-year-old political activist who has they've been consistently anti-genocide in terms of the Israeli assault on Gaza, anti-apartheid. She's been a consistent activist on the, you know, pro-Palestine side of this equation. So she said, quote, our family made the joint decision not to endorse a presidential candidate. This was the first and only time I've been involved in the process, and points to Kamala's support for Israel's war in Gaza. So, you know, like I said, more principled, certainly, you know, a direction I support a lot more in terms of the rationale behind it. Although you still have to say, like, you know, the billionaire influence part, even if it is a cause that I support, it's still a troubling direction.
Well, and this, look, the whole point is, to me, this just goes against the idea of the news business in the first place. Like, these endorsements, and specifically in the more partisan age, they're not swaying anybody. They're purely cultural signifiers. And I think that's fundamentally wrong with the way that this all should be in the first place. Like, notice, you know, nobody's been endorsing anybody over here. I did a whole monologue where I said how you should vote. And specifically, it was like how you should think about voting based on the issues that are important to you, because you're the one who should make that decision. Outsourcing your thinking to somebody else is frankly ridiculous. But that is a mainstay of a lot of current Republican outlets and a lot of these Democratic ones. So there's a meta conversation, I guess, to be had. But broadly, what I really come back to is these journalists who are constantly tut-tutting everybody who's canceling their Washington Post subscription, I'll be like, hey, I hate to break it to you. The people who subscribe to it, they didn't do it for the news. They did it for this democracy dies in the darkness Mueller shit. And so you cannot be mad at them when they cancel because you renege on the vision that they sold. That's the whole point.
Bezos is in general, even just from a business, has been a horrendous owner of the Post. They have been bleeding subscribers, for a while now. New York Times has been able to very successfully
they've
position
rolled it up.
Their business, and they have all these different the cooking and the sports and the games and all this stuff that's very popular that isn't just reliant on opposition to this one political figure. But, I'm sure the Post is going to be fine because, like I said, they've got a billionaire owner who to make up that lost thousands of subscriptions is absolutely nothing. But I saw someone tweet this, and I think this is probably correct, that there will likely be a lot less. I think these are indications that there will be a lot less institutional resistance to Trump this time around. That more the MO is let's try to be neutral, let's try to placate him, let's try not to earn his ire, let's try not to, tank, have our government contracts canceled, et cetera, et cetera. And, we had already seen this in terms of Wall Street and finance warming up to Trump. The number of donors that he's getting from the institutional finance, much larger than they were back in 2016 or even in 2020. He has gone out of his way to make explicit promises to billionaires in the country. Obviously, he's backed by the wealthiest person on the planet. But I do think that this is an indication that the strategy of lockstep institutional resistance to Trump has basically disintegrated into, no, we're going to try to appease him, try to go along to get along so that we don't end up in his target.
Yeah, and I also just think there's a cultural difference at this point. Trump has been around for a long time. The shock of his win in 2016 and that level of employee walkout outrage, this stuff is gone, at this point. And if I don't see it coming back in that way. Whatever resistance to Trump, what form that will take, it will not be the cringe 2017 version. I would hope it's much more of a deep, actual assessment within the party about hey, why didn't we have a primary? Why did we prop up Biden for such a long? Actually, I'm curious what you think. Do you think that'll happen, or do you think they're going to go Russiagate again? Or some similar cope? What do you think the cope will be?
It's going to be cope, of course.
Just racism?
No, I think probably they'll blame it depends on how the election results go down, Michigan, but it's certainly possible they'll blame people who voted for Jill Stein or sat out because they were disgusted with the support for a genocide.
Yeah.
I think that's a pretty clear trajectory. You already see the ads that are against Jill Stein. You see those efforts underway. So that will be a big part of it. But I think also secretly they'll just decide it's sexism and we could just never run a woman again.
Right. Which is so dumb. Again, Gretchen Whitmer would be way more competitive in this race.
But don't you think that's true? If Hillary and Kamala both lose to Trump, the secret assessment, the public assessment will be, the public's too racist, sexist, blah, blah, blah. And the secret assessment will be that's why we must only run men from here on out.
I think it won't be an elite assessment. Unfortunately, I think a lot of it will come to voters. Democratic voters care a lot about winning, and they're less ideological in terms of they're willing to go along with a lot, and they want to win. And so if that is the assessment from elite media and others that is kind of pumped out there, then they may internalize it. Again, I think that's totally incorrect. She's not that far away from
She's doing way better than the old white guy was.
Biden. Yeah, exactly. So I'm
she's
well,
in it,
kind of a dumb thesis, but I could see it. I don't know. I really do hope when Biden is gone and we can all talk honestly, that we'll just talk about how insane it was to prop him up for as long as we did. How insane it was not to have him.
That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Because they're all complicit in it.
Yeah, that's true.
So they can't. Yeah. They can't. It can't be that. In fact, actually, it's much more likely the conversation you get is we should have stuck with Biden. I'm telling you, I already see people on Twitter who are I'm not convinced that she's better than Biden. It's you are insane.
Yeah.
You are go back and watch that debate and tell me that this was the guy that Democrats should have run. No, obviously, the much better direction would have been to actually have a primary process where voters actually got to vet these candidates, where, even if it does end up being Kamala Harris at the end of the day, she has to go through the rigors of that and is strengthened by that process. That's clear, very obvious take. And then there's, I'm sure there'll also be, if she loses Pennsylvania, there'll be that she should have picked Josh Shapiro take.
Oh, yeah.
Right? That'll be a big one as well. So it just all depends on the flavor of what goes down. But I think you are much more likely to see the we should have stuck with Biden than the we should have actually had a democratic process.
Yeah, very possible. All right, guys, we got Treat to Parsi standing by. Let's get to it.
Hey, if you like that video, hit the like button or leave a comment below. It really helps get the show to more people.
And if you'd like to get the full show ad-free and in your inbox every morning, you can sign up at breakingpoints.com.
That's right. Get the full show, help support the future of independent media at breakingpoints.com.